Welcome, and thanks so much for attending. I'm Scott with Chief Architect, and I'm live here at home, as I suspect many of you are, or most of you are. I thought it'd be good to relaunch our live webinars. And today I'm going to share the tips and techniques that I use for using 3D software to design and sell. Typically, I do this presentation for live audiences, and I can read the body language and maybe coax questions out of people. Today, we don't have that luxury. I would encourage you to chat your question in or raise your hand and we'll unmute your mic. I'd like to incorporate as much as we can in today's presentation live and make sure we get your questions answered. Today's session is supposed to be educational. If you're a member of the NKBA and would like to get NKBA credit for the National Kitchen and Bath Association, you can self-report on their website. You may notice my occasional assistant. This is Maya, my 3-pound vicious Maltese. So you can take a look at her here a little bit closer. I also have a couple of Chief Architect staff members available. One, they're going to keep an eye on me, and two, to help answer questions as we go through it. As I mentioned in the seminar today, I typically do this live, and the last time I did this was at the Kitchen and Bath Show in January. And during that show, most of the audience had indicated that they didn't need any more business. And we know that our world is rapidly changing now. I think you can use Chief Architect software to become more productive in your design firm or as a designer, and also as the landscape becomes more competitive. So here's what I'm going to cover today. Let me switch around here, open up my screen share. So we're going to go through 3D design options. In particular, I'm going to talk about dynamic defaults. We have a new feature that we began to shift towards for creating options for clients called the style palette. I'm going to show you how replace from library works. I'm going to go through rendering and talk about how to use interactive models. Many of you already know this, but just to kind of recap, the benefits in setting expectations, limiting choices when you use 3D software. To avoid surprising your clients, you want to make sure that they know exactly what the remodel project's going to look like or their new construction. Happy customers. Obviously, customers are a good source of referrals for future business. And also being able to upsell and increase your profit margins, especially during today's world. Many of you are pretty familiar with being able to read a 2D or an elevation view, but your clients may have a difficult time converting these drawings into their new space. So using 3D software is a great way to be able to do that. When you do a design, rather than make it look like brand new construction, I like to add some accessories in here. And if you notice the difference that it makes to be able to visualize what the space is going to look like as you go through it, again, a simple look, a more sophisticated look, where you actually take your phone out in the field and do a photograph, put it into the window, and then render it. It's pretty easy. I'm going to show you some of the steps to make this a process that is a quick process for you. Sometimes I like to use the 3D renderings to augment my construction drawings. It could be you have a complex set of ceiling designs, and showing it in 3D can be a beneficial process. Think about that as you create your construction drawings, being able to put these 3D renderings in part of your construction drawings. Talk about options. Many of you provide options for your clients. And if you take a look at this scene, I've changed it with mainly the island and some materials. I'm going to go through and show you how to create options using the style palette, using replace from library to make it a easier process as we go through it. So here's what I'm going to start with. I'm going to start with the 3D design tools. We're going to begin by looking at dynamic defaults. I'm going to move on and look at using the style palette tool, show you what that is, how it works. As I do that, we'll be looking at material and color options, and then finally we'll take a look at replace from library. So again, if you have questions as we go through this, please raise your hand or chat in with questions that you may have, and we'll try to make sure that we get those addressed during the session. Let me go ahead and open up the program. And I'm going to start with a pretty simple example here. I've got a situation where using dynamic defaults where you can define the different styles of cabinets that you have, and you can think about this as working as kind of a search and replace. So you notice in this example I have up on the screen, I have a dozen options that I've narrowed this down to for the kitchen, and the kitchen is already designed. I can use these cabinets, set them as a default, and it will search and replace inside of that kitchen and swap it out. And if you look towards the bottom down here on my screen, I've rendered it out with each of those options, and it's a pretty quick process. To show you how this works, I'm going to open up a plan, and I'm going to go through and I'm just going to target the kitchen island and show you the process of how you can use dynamic defaults to your benefit. Let's go ahead and take a 3D overview. What I've done here is I've set up the configuration with 3 different options for the island. And the key to this is these cabinets on the right have been customized, and all of the cabinets that make up the kitchen island are default cabinets. When I choose the brown cabinet by clicking on it, and I come down into the lower edit menu, you may not be able to easily see this, but there's an option down here in the lower edit menu called Set as Default. And when you click on Set as Default, here's what happens. It takes all of the properties that you've designed into that cabinet and applies them to the default cabinet. And if you use something like Microsoft Word and you've used search and replace for a particular word, that's exactly what the dynamic default is. So let's take a look at how this works, and this will be a segue into a newer and stronger ability for this with style palettes. So let's go off to the side here, and I'm just going to make a copy of this cabinet, slide it over here, and let's go through and customize this and make this a 4th option. Let's slide over a little bit further. I'm going to open up the library browser, and I'm going to go through our manufacturer catalogs. I'm just going to come down and I'm going to pick one of these catalog companies. Let's see if I can find one here quickly. Here's Crestwood. So if I come down and I look at their cabinet styles, let's go into their frameless door styles. And I'm just going to grab one of their particular door styles that might look a little bit different. Let's go ahead and grab this door style in here, and I'll apply it on there. We'll do the same thing for the drawer style and apply it on there. Now in these cabinet companies, they have the wood species. So if I were to come down, let's see what this looks like, quarter sawn. And we'll just apply that onto the entire box in here. So I'm just going to spray that on to that object. Let's make sure I got the toe kick. So I've created the customization on the door style, the wood species. If I look at their finishes, let's come down, let's look in their stain category. And I'm going to grab this basalt, and in the stain mode, notice my cursor changes to the paint roller. You can easily toggle that between the paint roller and solid body paint by toggling that on. And I'm just going to stain that entire box that color. And then finally, let's come up and find a countertop material. Here's Cambria's library. Let's see if we can find something a little bit neutral. By the way, don't judge me by these materials that I'm spraying on here live. So I've gone through and created some customizations onto this cabinet. You could change the hardware on here, anything really that you want. And now that I've created this 4th option, you can click on the cabinet, you can set as your default, and then it will apply that onto the entire island. So it's a pretty quick way to use this dynamic default, replace out all of those default cabinets by creating a custom cabinet. We've started enhancing this feature more and more, and we're switching gears as we moved into version X12 of the software, and we're looking at using what's called style palettes. As we talk about style palettes, these are a collection. You can think of your artist board that you may use and creating a style of different cabinets, materials, wall colors, molding styles, and using that. Let's take a look at how we can do that. And before I move on and close this plan, I'm going to use this last cabinet as an example. I'm going to add this into my library, click on it. I'm going to come down, add it to my library, and I'm going to use this for the presentation that we use in the style palette. So once I'm finished and I've got that in there, go ahead and delete these other two items that I did earlier. So let's take a look at how style palettes work and what they are. So as I open up another plan, here's what a style palette is. It's a collection of cabinets. So that's base cabinets, wall cabinets, full height cabinets. It's your doors, the interior and exterior. It's the windows and it's the rooms. Let's take a 3D view of this example project that I have open. So here's the 3D representation of what we were just looking at. So these 5 different rooms have a collection of all of those attributes we just talked about. And when you look at the room attribute, that's really the flooring material, the wall material, the moldings. In this case, I have wall coverings or wainscot that you can use in there. So all of these items have created a style palette. And you can add these style palettes into your library and reuse them. Let me open up my library and let's take a look. So I'm going to scroll down into my personal user catalog. And the style options that we have here, let's see, let's look at style option number 3 right in here. So all of those components that you see in this main room right in the center of the screen are actually contained in this style palette. And I can apply that by object, by room, by entire plan. Let me open up a kitchen plan and let's take a look at how this actually works on a completed plan. In this completed kitchen, I can now apply these style palettes in here. I'm going to click on option 1. And just like the material painter that you may be familiar with already, these have scoping tools. You can apply these scoping tools. Let's take a look at this down in the lower left-hand menu. You see a series of spray cans. And again, it may be difficult to read, but there's an object mode, there's a room mode, there's a floor mode, and there's a plan mode. And you can apply it in any one of those modes. In this example, I'm going to use the room mode. Then, as I move the cursor up, you'll see a gray highlight come over the room. I can click inside the room and then apply that style palette with all of the attributes immediately to that room. It's a very fast way to create a new room scene. So you might think about doing this and saving it for a client in different configurations. You might also think about saving this. Maybe you have craftsman style, you have a traditional style. You can save these in the library. You can reuse them. You can share them with other designers. And again, it's a quick process. You just click on the style palette, you click in here, and apply it to the entire room. Let's take a look at how you build one and how the process works in a little more detail. So let's kind of zoom around here. And I'm going to grab that cabinet that we added to the library that we just did using the dynamic defaults. That came down into the bottom of my library. I'm going to come over here and I'm just going to place this right in the design. Let's rotate around, take a look at it. So this cabinet, we customized the door, the drawer, wood species, and a few other things. I'm now ready to add this and begin a style palette. So there's a couple ways you can do it. One is you could right click on that in your library browser and you could say add to a style palette. You can also click and you can multi-select. We'll go back to the other plan and we'll do a multi-select. When you highlight it in your 3D or in a 2D view, you're going to see that style palette tool in the lower edit menu as well. And let's go ahead and select this. The program at this point is going to ask you if you want to create a new style palette, if you want to add it to an existing one. And I'm going to create a brand new style palette, beginning with just this base cabinet. Now, when you create a style palette, one, you can give it a name, and I'm just going to give it a name in here. And let's kind of talk about the dialogue that's in here. You see the title of it, Base Cabinet. If you click the Open button, that's no different than clicking on the cabinet, opening it. You can go through all the different panels, make changes to it. Use the object, which means if you have several other items in here, wall cabinets, full height cabinets, doors, windows, you may not want to use it when you apply a style palette. So you have control over turning that on and turning that off. Here's one of the powerful features in the style palette is the Set Properties tool. When you use the Set Properties tool, there's about 100 different attributes that you can choose from that will apply. So for example, in this situation that I have set up, it's applying the backsplash, the box construction, and as you scroll down through here, typically I think our out of the box default has the most common things that might be transferred, but you can be very specific in these attributes that you want to apply or not apply. You may be specific for a particular client, or you may just have it set up for a generic style palette that you use across all of your design process. So let me apply this. I see a few hands raised here, and let's just take a look at this. So I've created an initial style palette. We've gone with the default properties, and let's go ahead and close the dialog. And now that's going to show up over in my library as a style palette. Now there's one scoping tool that is accessible only in 2D. And you could apply this in 3D, but let's assume that we just want to apply this to the island itself. And you could select this style palette, go into the object mode, right? And you could click on a per cabinet basis and do that. There's 10 or so cabinets in this island configuration and a custom countertop. In a plan view, we have a marquee select. Let's take a look at how we can use this in marquee select. And since I have a custom countertop up here above all of this cabinet configuration, I also want to add a custom countertop into the style palette. So here's what I'm going to do to make that a quick process. I'm going to draw a custom countertop out here. Let's pick up the material off of there. Click on that countertop. Click on Add to Style Palette. And in this case, I'm going to add it to the existing style palette that I just created. And again, you could go into the set properties. I'm going to assume that the material and the thickness is appropriately set. This style palette now has two elements in it, the cabinet and the countertop. Okay, so the marquee select has to be done in your floor plan view. Let me go over to the floor plan here. Click on the style palette, come over and change your scoping tool. Again, this is only available in the floor plan view. Again, it's probably difficult to see my screen unless you zoom, but it says marquee mode. So once I'm in marquee mode, I'm going to come down here and I'm going to hold my left mouse button down, click and drag over the island. Let's go back into the 3D view. Let's just delete these two guys. We don't need them anymore. And you can see we applied it to that island in a marquee mode. Okay, so I'll show you how to create a larger style palette, but let's look at a few questions here. Phil, you got any questions for us?
I think the majority of questions you've covered so far, Scott. Thanks.
Anybody at all? Anybody want to raise their hand and ask a question? Unmute your mic. We can do that for you. Danny Sharp. I'm going to unmute your mic, Danny. See if you have a question. Let's see if that works here. Okay. If you wanted to unmute, we'd be happy to take your question. Anybody at all? Okay, Amy Britton. Amy, I unmuted your mic. Do you have a question that we could help with?
I did. Can you hear me?
I can.
Oh, good. Okay. So it seems somewhat laborious to make all these different palettes. And obviously you want to save them in the library. Is this going in the user library? Where does this go?
Yeah, no, it can go in your user library. if I scroll up and on my user catalog down here,
Okay.
so when you
Yeah.
create a new style palette, the one that I just created was down here, and I just called it Style Palette April 2. And
Right.
typically I'm going to probably organize these, so I might take this and just move it up and put it into my Style Palette folder, paste that in there, and now all of my style palettes are collected. And as you go through and you create different styles, you might think about having maybe subfolders in here for various styles that you want, or even maybe particular client. If you have styles that are unique to a client, you can maybe create a few folders in there.
Okay, and then it would behoove you to do lots of backup on the user lib catalog because I've lost some creations of mine in the past
Yeah,
in
sure.
my user.
Uh-huh.
In my,
Yep, it's that you can easily back up your user catalog if you wanted to. First of all, if I wanted to export my catalog, I just right click on it and you could export that library, share it with other designers. If you want to put it on the cloud, you could put it on the cloud if you have a larger design firm and wanted to make that accessible to other staff members or maybe a coworker that's working in another firm. And you can do that at that folder level. You can also do it at your user catalog level. You can make a backup and save things.
can I ask one more question?
Absolutely.
Okay, when I've used the default make default feature in the past, I
Mm-hmm.
find that sometimes it will be applied unevenly. In
Uh-huh.
other words, some pieces will change,
Yeah.
but not all.
Yeah.
Is that just a bug that I'm getting, or?
Well, in the dynamic default option that I kind of showed with the island, there are some things that just aren't default options. If I kind of scroll down here and we look at my configuration, you notice that I have maybe a crown molding on my cabinet, on my wall cabinets.
Mhm.
That's actually not a dynamic default. And so beginning in version X12 of our software, we took those dynamic defaults and began shifting that over to the style palette approach. Because in the style palette, if we were to open up one of these palettes here, let's go ahead and click open, and we were to go into the wall cabinet, you'll see that in the case for the moldings, they're in here. It's also in the properties that you can then transfer if you search on these, because there's so many of them. You can see that it will actually transfer almost all of the attributes for your cabinets. So really, I think this is the preferred method going forward. I did want to make you aware of the dynamic defaults. Not everybody here is using Chief Architect X12. So style palettes, in my opinion, are just a easier way to make this happen.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm still on 11, so I'm intrigued to jump to 12 so I can try this.
Yeah. Well, and if you're not on version X12, you can either upgrade or we have that trial version. You can check it out. Thanks a lot, Amy, for the questions.
Thank you, Scott.
Okay. Do we have other questions here? Let's see. Well, looks like there's a few questions. Phil, do you notice anything else we want to make sure that we get covered from folks that have raised their hand?
Looks
Scott,
like Norman has a question.
Phil, you want to unmute him?
right, Norman, you should be live to ask your question.
Thank you very much. Hi, Scott.
Hi, Norman.
Hey, just going back, previously you had sort of the 4 cabinets and the island bench, and you sort of sprayed. I think you might have answered that in the last question with the defaults. So obviously when you pick one style and then sprayed that island bench, the other 4 cabinets, which were your styles, didn't change. Is that because they're not part of that dynamic default now?
So in this example that I have up here, Norman, I'm not using the default option. I'm using the style palette option. And if I were to go into object mode with this particular option, one that I have up here, let's make sure I'm in object mode, and I click on a cabinet in object mode, it's only going to change the one cabinet. That way it's on a per object basis. And I think it's a more powerful way to use and create your style options. If you're using X12, I kind of avoid using dynamic defaults if you're using X12.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
All right, thanks so much.
You bet. How we doing, Phil? More questions that we can answer? Here's one that I saw come in while Phil's waiting to unmute the next person. Here's a question that came in is, how do you group select and make these style palettes in a pretty quick way? Let's go back over into that style palette mode that I'm in. And here's one of the quickest ways to create a style palette. So in this example, I have all the cabinets. I have a window, a door, and doors can be interior or exterior doors. And if you hold your shift key down, so I clicked on the full height cabinet, hold my shift key down, and then click on the wall cabinet, click on the backsplash. Make sure I get this. Let's come over here. So here's what I'm going to do. Hold my shift key down, full height cabinet, wall cabinet, base cabinet, door, window, interior and exterior door. And in this case, you see that I have 6 objects selected. If you're able to see really well in the bottom left-hand corner. Now that those 6 items are selected, notice in my lower edit menu down here, the Add to Style Palette button is enabled. At this point, I can easily create that style palette. And let's just create a new one here. That pops up, and we'll just call this style palette 2. And you see that I have all of those components in here. And if I would have had a custom backsplash and a custom countertop, those 2 could have been added by that group select. What can't be added in a group selection is the room. Let's close this. So you notice the room, which makes up the flooring material, the moldings, wall color. Again, if I had crown molding or a wall covering, I could add that in there. That can't be group selected, so I can't click on the room and click on a base cabinet. So I have to click on the room separately, then click on Add to Style Palette. I'm going to add it to the existing style palette that we just created, Style Palette 2, and then I've got that room in there, and you'll see all of the components. So it's a pretty easy way to group select things and add them to the style palette. Okay, Phil, did you have somebody that you wanted to unmute here?
We had a question come in just asking if you could describe how you made these partial rooms that you have kind of pre-configured for style palettes.
Yeah, so they're kind of a little showroom style, and I just kind of did it. The only reason I did this was to show visually how to create a style palette. And if you go back into my floor plan view, all I've done here is I've created an exterior wall, an interior wall. It's technically a room. And if I turn on my invisible walls, so there's an invisible wall that goes around here. Let me turn that on. Let's just make sure that I can come in here, invisible walls. If I turn that on, it may be more obvious. So I have room definition, which is important to have the flooring in there. And so all it is a couple of walls, a few of them are invisible, and then I put in the cabinets, and that's what you're seeing in this view here. Phil, more questions?
I think that covered all the questions for the time being.
Okay, great. So let's go ahead and close, well, yeah, let's close the style palette rooms here. And let's maybe fix this room. So here's one of the things, it may be easier since we've kind of messed this up. I'm just going to reopen this real quick. I wanted to share with you, let's go back in. I wanted to share with you another approach, and I'm looking for, yeah, here we go. I've got a second monitor over here, so I'm looking over to make sure I don't have any questions. I want to talk about another way to make the process easy when you're creating options, and it's replace from library. Probably many of you are already using this. I use it quite a bit, and you can create different options as you go through it. One of the things that I've done here in this example is, among changing some of the colors and materials, I swapped the islands out. And if you go through the process of configuring a kitchen island, and maybe it's something that you really like as a designer, you may add that to your library. I have a collection of islands that I use, and you may use that in a future design. You can unblock it and configure it specifically for that client. But to get an idea, if you've built maybe 3 islands for a specific client, as I have here, you can then quickly swap those out and create your renderings. So let's take a look at how you can use this replace from library tool. So I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to block my island. So I'm going to create a block. And when you block these items, if you have electrical, which I do, I haven't turned it on, you can, once you've blocked it, you can easily add that into your library. There's an add to library button, and that's how you can put those things in your library. Let's take our 3D view. And I'm just going to use this camera and point and click in, well, might be easier to show it with the overhead view. So in this example, this is the island that we ended up going with for this particular project. What would it look like with one of the other islands, right? Inquiring clients want to know. So if I come in here and we look at one of the islands that I have set up, I've got this different style of island that's got a different shape. It's got a much larger sink in it. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to tap on the island. So you see the block highlight. In the edit menu, there's a tool called replace from library. Let's go ahead and swap this with that island over there. So this is going to ask you, well, do you want to replace this object, objects in the room, objects on the floor? Well, I only have one island, so let's use the top selection. And I'm going to come down into the folder that I have that particular island in. There it is. And now I can swap that out pretty quickly. You can see that my other island had under counter lighting, so I'll just delete that. So I quickly did, you can think of this again as kind of search and replace. And in this case, it's replacing a library object. Now this works on a number of objects, and one use case that can be kind of helpful is maybe swapping out these stools. If I were to select the island, unblock the island, so it pulls out the different components that that island's made up of, I can now grab that stool, use the same tool, right, replace from library. And in this case, I'm going to select all identical objects in the room, browse out to the library, and let's see if I have one that I can quickly grab. So here's another stool option that I've narrowed it down to out of the 3 options after meeting with the client. And since I replaced all of them in the room, it maintains the same coordinates. So if you've gotten to the level of detail of twisting them 45 degrees or 23 degrees, they all come in at that same relative location. So it can be a powerful tool to swap things in and out when you're doing your design work. How are we doing on questions? Anybody want to unmute their mic and ask a question or two here? Bill, you're closer to this than I am. You're monitoring it.
No questions have come in recently, but we'll leave it open for another minute or two for people to ask questions.
I know I'm not that thorough of a presenter, so if you do have questions, make sure you ask. I'd be happy to unmute your microphone or chat those in. Again, if you have questions as you're going through and learning how Chief Architect works or how you can use these tools to be more efficient, we're happy to try and cover those in this session. Okay, feel free, let me change my camera view. Feel free to ask questions. I'm going to move on and I'm going to talk a little bit about rendering. And I'm going to show you some of the things that I do when I create my renderings, but I'm going to show you some of the tricks that I use for rendering. And let's go through a few of these in here. Let me change my camera view. One of my favorite camera views is to use this top-down camera that doesn't have the ceiling on it. You notice that none of the attic walls, because we have a shed ceiling in here, actually display in this style of view. So I'm going to actually use the full camera, and I'm going to use this and just point and click in this direction. And let's talk about a few rendering things when you're creating your renderings. First of all, there's a lot of different rendering techniques that are available to you. So this probably isn't new information to you, but being able to toggle between vector, technical illustration, I like to use quite a bit, maybe watercolor. And you may realize that some of these settings in here can be fine-tuned. So as I switch this into the physically based render, looks okay, but not great. Well, here's a couple things you can do. One, when you're doing your rendering, is make sure your lighting is adjusted. So one of the things that I like to do is when you click adjust lights and we're looking at it, you know, it looks kind of dark to me. If you take a look at the lighting, your designs, and notice on my ceiling here, I have a lot of lights. This room is filled with can lights, right? And you can't really see what's going on. When I click adjust lights, typically your default setting out of the box is to use 8 lights. So the program is discreetly figuring out, well, which 8 lights, and it's randomly choosing which 8 lights. So one easy solution would be to just change that to 50, and you're going to get a lot more lights on. The more lights you have on, the slower it gets. So I usually only do this when I'm creating maybe a final render. Lights can be turned on down here. So you kind of come down, look at all of the lights, and this, you know, there's a lot of lights in here. You can segment these and actually create a light set by group selecting these. And that's kind of what I did, is I created a light set by turning on different lights, and I created a kitchen and living room light set. And if I turn that on, let's click the update button here. You notice immediately what happens. You see the light come on underneath the cook hood. You see more of the lighting come on, and it makes the scene a lot brighter. Let's go ahead and switch this back to the watercolor view. And if we were to go back to the default lights, let's just switch that back to the automatic mode. You're going to notice this looks a lot darker. It's because you don't have enough lights on. So think about that when you're doing your rendering. Again, one of the easiest ways is to just crank that up to maybe a bigger number, or you could build a light set and you could do it based on room. If you're going to do a whole house and you turn on, I don't know, maybe 200 lights, your rendering will be slow. So that's why I have light sets, because if I'm working on a whole house, I don't want to have this set up to be very slow as I'm doing my typical editing. That's why I will build a light set. So that's an advantageous thing. It also makes your projects look a lot better when you're ready to export this out as a picture. Let me switch this render back to the standard render view. Here's another thing. If we zoom in, material properties in addition to your lights can have a big difference. You may have noticed my countertop having a reflection. You can set material properties. Let's pick on this TV on the wall. I'm going to use the Adjust Material Definition tool. It's the rainbow tool up in my menu. I'm going to come down, I'm going to click on this TV, and there's underneath the properties of the material, I'm on the Properties panel. There's an emissive setting for this particular general material. And if I just come down and I set it to be an LCD monitor, let's take a look at what it does. It adds a little, what I call a little something extra, and it just pops to create that. Realize all of your materials, if I click on the countertop and I pull that over onto this screen, you have properties you can set for your materials. There are many material settings you can choose. So if you want a marble floor and you want it to be polished, you can set all of those settings for those. Many of our materials that ship have these settings somewhat with a nice default. But if you're after a specific setting, material properties can make a big difference. Taking a look for questions here, Phil.
Thanks, Scott. We had several questions come in about light sets. How do you create a light set, turn lights on and off, and maybe you could show a little bit more information about that. And then we also had a question on sun angles and how you show the sunlight coming through windows.
Okay, let's take the sun angle question first. Notice that this still looks kind of dingy. And if we go back up into the tool that we were adjusting the lights with, and we come down to adjust sunlight, right now I'm using a generic sun, which I like to use quite a bit. Sun follows camera. And if I turn it on to say sun angle, if one's available, and I did build at least one of them in here. Looks like I built two. I typically usually build two, one in the morning, one in the evening. You see I have a 10 a.m. and a 6 p.m. So let's go ahead and just switch that to the 10 a.m. and use that. And when I switch it, you see nothing happen, right? Cameras, when you open them, may have particular defaults. In my case, when I take a 3D view, I like my cameras just to be super fast. When I'm ready to then do an export of the rendering, I then dial it in so it looks great. Currently, my sun shadows are turned off. How do you turn them on? Let's come up and let's look at the Edit Active View. And my menu bar possibly looks different than yours. Right now, I'm clicking on Edit Active View. You can probably find that in your tools, but I've just clicked Edit Active View for my camera. Notice in this camera setting, my shadows are not turned on. So I'm going to turn those on. If you're doing kitchen and bath work, reflections, my reflections are turned off. Those are maybe like your mirrors. Shadows, reflections can be expensive depending on how big your model is. My default setting, I typically just turn them off until I'm ready to create and export the render because I like to work quickly when I'm doing my editing. So now that I've turned on the shadows, let's see what happens. So based on that sun angle, you see the sun coming through the windows. Hopefully, if you ask that question, that covers it. If you want to learn more about creating sun angles, you can look that up in the help file. I would encourage you in your preferences, look at your latitude and longitude. The program shifts with North Idaho's latitude and longitude, and chances are you don't live here. So if you want to change that, you can be exact in your preferences under CAD. And then when you draw your sun angle, you can set the time of day and it will be a lot more accurate. Let's see. The other question was on light sets. And how do you create a light set, right? You maybe don't need to if you're just doing a small project. You can just crank up your number of lights to maybe 50 or 75 when you edit your camera. But if you want to create a light set, let's take a look. Let's go back in here. Let's go into the adjust lights. And oftentimes you're going to have a plan that you open up and it will just have a default light set. And there will be a handful of lights turned on perhaps, and you can turn them on or off in here. So whatever your default light set has on, you can create a copy of it. Okay, so if I were to create a copy of this and we give it this new light set name, so here's new, and then we came down here and let's basically highlight all the lights. Let's turn them all off, okay? So currently I want to turn all lights on in by room. So if I sort this and I came down and we came down through kitchen, scroll down, and I'm holding my shift key down. So I now have all the lights in the kitchen. I turn them on. This light set called new, when I switch to it, would only have the lights on in the kitchen. So it's a good reason to name your rooms. I have a pantry that's kind of off to the left. You probably can't see on your screen. And if you want to have lights turned on in all of these rooms, then make sure that you build the light set so that it has the information for all the rooms that you want to turn them on. So I usually do build light sets when I'm building a larger project. Hopefully that answered your question. Okay, Phil, how are we doing on questions?
I don't think we've had any more questions come in for the time being.
Okay. See, I have just a few more minutes. I want to show you two quick things. One, I like to typically personalize the designs. And when you're out on a job site and you're going to add personalization, you've got your cell phone on you, take a picture where you're going to maybe add the new door, the big picture window, add it into your library, and then you can drop that into the design. So if I came in here into my backdrops, here's my last Las Vegas class, and I post that in there. I can just drop that in by clicking on the backdrop, right? Just to kind of demonstrate it. Hopefully those people aren't mad at me. Hey, there's Phil. That's Phil right there. Hey, Phil, a couple more staff members back there. And you can grab these pictures and just drop those into the backdrop. It's a pretty easy process to do. So when you have, I create my own folder for backdrops. You can come in here and say new backdrop and then browse out to your folder where you have your photo, add it in there, and then you can create it. Let me switch my light set back to, that's running pretty slow. Now, one last thing, if you want to take any of your renderings and export them, you can do that in the menu. You can also export a 360 rendering, and you can share those with your clients. It's a good way to be able to share a little more of the design with them. And when you create a 360, and you notice my camera here is saved kind of pointing towards the focal point of the kitchen, that will be your thumbnail. And if you want to export this as a regular picture, you can come down to your export menu, click export the picture, which is just what you see on my screen. And then there's a 360 option. And if we come in here, a lot of times I like to switch this. These 360 images are 4 images across and 2 images high. So I usually make these pretty large. You can see my attributes here, 8192 by 4096. And if you click on Save to Cloud, this will put it up in your cloud. And if we just call this My Kitchen, and let's make sure that I just put that in there. We'll just call it Kitchen. There we go. So once you export these, I don't want you to see my secrets, so I'm going to just pull that over to my other screen. When you do this, it's going to ask you to sign in to the Chief Architect Cloud account. So it takes a minute to export because, again, it's a pretty large format picture. When that pushes that out to the cloud account, you can go out to your account and then you can share it with customers. You can also put it on your website. Let's see if we can open this up. Again, that was a pretty large file that I just did here. So here we are live watching render work. So once that's pushed out, you can click on your online account and let's go ahead and open that up. Come over here. Let's go out to my account. Let's come over to my 360 panorama renders. And what should have happened is that kitchen that we just pushed out just now is available right here. And if I make that public, you can now share that and text it to your clients. So I'm just going to grab that, copy it, and click on this. You can actually share that with everybody. And I think, where's my chat option? So I just chatted that and sent it out to everybody. If you wanted to click on that, you can make these full screens and text them to your clients. You can put them on your web page. If I come over to our web page, you see that we have a handful of 360 renders here. And you can include those on your website because we'll host them from the Chief Architect site. You can get that code and share it with your web person. If we go back over into my account, let's go back here. And if you come down to the share operation, there's an embed tab. Here's the code that you could give to your web person to actually put that in your website. Okay, looks like we're nearing the hour of completion. Let me just show you a couple of slides and then I'm just going to wrap up. If there's any particular questions, I'd be happy to answer them. As some of you are starting to depart, and I want to make sure you're aware of resources if you're trying to use this time to learn a little bit. We have free and paid webinars. If you found this webinar helpful, I'm happy to do more of these. Maybe just let us know, drop us a note at sales. Maybe Carrie drop in a poll. We have on-demand classes. These are classes that you can watch on demand. We have one-on-one training, our video playlists, our how-to articles, and a great resource, especially where you can connect with people in your area's Chief Talk. It's a really amazing resource of our user community. I'd encourage you to use it. So thanks for watching. I'd be happy to stick around here for a few minutes if you have questions that maybe you'd like to get answered, weren't covered in the session. Thanks a lot for attending, and I wish you all to be safe in this world, and hope you can use the time to learn about Chief Architect. Caitlin, I see you may have a question.
Hi, I'm very new to this, and you may hear my baby screaming in the background.
That's okay.
But I'm very new, so I'm just wondering if there are any beginner webinars and in terms of creating, I guess, user catalogs for creating your own custom tiles,
Sure.
for squaring, backsplashes, hexagon, herringbone. That's
Let's see. Let me point you, if I can open up my web browser here. On our Getting Started, Caitlin, resources underneath our website, I'm under Getting Started Resources. One of the nice things we have is training videos that you can watch. And then I see Adrienne may be still available. I might let her further answer that question about creating custom tiles and maybe how to get started with doing some of that. So thanks for the question. I'm going to unmute her microphone and see if she can weigh in on this.
Thanks very much.
Yeah.
Scott, I just posted a link to the custom tile blog post.
Okay. It gets into more detail depending on the level of sophistication you want to get in creating your own tiles. You know, obviously you can do the simple way where you just do a screen grab of a tile that's on a website as long as it looks pretty good and it's flat. And if you want to get more sophisticated, like anything, we have a fairly thorough blog posting that was sent out about how to get involved with that. Danielle, are you there?
I just asked what the oldest Mac OS system requirement would be just to have your basic use of the program.
Sure. Currently with Chief Architect X12, we're using both Mojave and Catalina.
Okay.
So that's kind of our minimum system requirements on a Mac right here.
Yep. Okay, thank you very
Awesome.
much.
Thanks a lot. Ivana, are you there?
I am.
How can we help today?
A little terrified. This is really new to me. I went to school 2010 for interior design and a minor in architectural design and totally forgot it because I went in a different direction. But I am back home for the last, 4 months, and I've been blessed to have a few clients come my way. They're pretty high profile, and I feel like I'm lacking in illiterate right now, and I need some extra help so I can prove my worth. So I am trying out the X12 version, but a little illiterate on this end because I really need that extra hand in showing details so the client is saying, hey, I'm paying worthy of the value that you bring. And right now I'm just not too confident just yet. Yeah. So I'm trying to figure out how you upload these catalogs that I did purchase some, and someone just answered me, which is great. My other question as well is, when you're sending out the 360 or the renderers, or if you want them to come or something, is it going to have the Chief Architect logo on it, or will it be able where we can brand it ourselves so that the client is not knowing, what we're using?
Okay, yeah, so good questions. First of all, if you're new to Chief Architect, we have a playlist, our video playlist. There's an introductory series that's a great getting started way to begin learning the program. If you want to get more detailed in that, we also do one-on-one training where we screen share and kind of work with you specifically. But I would at least start with that playlist. That's the introductory playlist. It's a good way to do that.
Regards to the branding, and then I did have another one.
Yeah, so let me just show you. So you'll notice that when I go into full screen, the branding, tough to see, but when you're using our system, it does have our logo on there that says Chief Architect. Now you can take these, and I did export that to my local disk. These look a little crazy when you export them to your local computer, but if I open up that 360 render, this one doesn't have a logo on it, and what our system does for you is it stitches it together as a globe. So remember, that's 4 images across and 2 images high. You can upload these to Facebook. And then if you wanted to overlay your logo maybe on this somewhere, then you could easily do that when you push it up there. And then it has whatever branding that you want on there. We do have that built into the program to some degree. When you're in a 3D view, we can toggle on our watermark, toggle on my watermark. It's difficult to see, but if I browse out, you can also put in your own watermark. If I come down, I'm going into my default settings. down here on watermark. And if I browse out, go out, I'm going to browse and grab a logo here, just off a little less transparent. So it's a little, so you can easily put your own logos on there and then export it out.
Scott, we've had
Oh,
Trudy
yeah.
here that's
Trudy.
had her hand raised for.
Go ahead, Trudy.
Okay, I've been using Sheet for a while now. I just started, thanks to all of this, using the cloud and trying to embed things onto Facebook, places like that. When I've opened up some of the links that I've sent to people, they aren't as pretty as maybe what I sent to them. Is there something that you need to be doing to those beyond just saving it and sending it, or?
So Trudy, when you say that they aren't as good as you thought they were when you sent it to them, is it a 3D picture and when you look at it from their end, it's not as high quality as you'd like?
I guess that would be one way to put it, or just, you know, I went back and watched the videos, and the one I'm kind of blanking on what it would, but it was aliasing and something else that, you know, you were turning on or off. When or where should I be setting that? And before, you know, should I be going into the cloud after I've sent something there to make sure that it's okay? I guess I'm very nervous. I'd like to embed some things on my web page and Facebook, but I've been playing with this for a couple weeks now, and it still doesn't seem to be quite as nice as like what I'm seeing you do.
Okay, a few things. Obviously, make sure that your lighting is turned on. Let me just switch this back to the watercolor view here real quickly. So in this case, I feel like this is a little bit dark, and you saw me turn on more lights. Again, the easiest way would just be to crank up your lights to 50 or something if it's a simple design. And then when you do that, I think in many cases, it's going to start looking a little bit better. And then when you export it, in theory, one of the things that's important when you export it, if I come over to my export menu, and let's just do this as a standard picture here. When you export it, make sure that your resolution setting here is high enough. A lot of times, my monitor that I have here in front of me is considered high definition, which just means typically 1920 wide by 1080 high. And you'll notice that my default window size is coming in here because it's cropped down after the title bars and on the top, bottom, and sides. And the height at most is 848. If you want a higher resolution image, a lot of times I, at a minimum, will put in 1080, and that will create a larger image. You can always resize those down, and that way you're going to get a bigger image. Might be a little higher quality depending on what you're going to try and do. But make sure it looks good on your screen first, and then when you do the export, push it out at a high enough resolution that it meets your end target.
Okay. Yeah, I hadn't made that adjustment at all. I've adjusted the lights and some of the textures and going in and doing some of those. And I just, you know, I ran a few tests, and when I opened it up, the phrase I always use is a little bit more cartoony on the other end. It just wasn't as crisp. It just wasn't anything that I really wanted to send.
Well, the other thing is, I didn't have time to show it, but underneath your rendering are technique options. If, for example, I prefer, you can adjust all of your different techniques, but if I were to just turn off the line drawing in watercolor, I don't like the way this looks.
Yeah, I agree.
and so all of the settings that you'll find underneath this render techniques, you can get very detailed and dial in these different settings so that it maybe better matches your style. In particular, this watercolor has a smooth amount, paint contrast, turbulence. There's a lot of settings in there. The other thing is we do ray trace rendering. Ray trace rendering is going to take a little longer to show, but if I open up one of these scenes here quickly, this is ray trace rendered. Takes a little bit longer to generate, but you can get a higher quality with the ray trace rendering.
So I can do a 360 through a ray trace?
You can.
Okay, I didn't know that.
You can if, again, this image I have on my screen here is 1920 by 1080. I usually do them larger in 360s. They do take longer because they're just so much bigger. But if we pop back over to my 360 page here, let's open up this kitchen. So this is ray trace rendered in here. You can push those out as a 360 as well.
Okay.
Little tip, if you do ray trace rendering, make sure you use the assistant when it comes up and start super small because they can take a while. I usually start with 400 pixels wide, and once it starts to look good, then I'll increase it to 800 pixels. And then when that looks good, I'll go to dinner or go to bed and crank it up to about 1920. Again, I like to use the high definition. That's pretty big. Then set it and typically let it go for at least 25 passes. That's very subjective. 25 passes, it depends on the room scene and how much light you have going on in it, because in the scene, in this small little scene you see in the lower right hand section of my screen, you know, the light can be bouncing all the way through that room, and it can take a while depending on, that's also a function of how fast and powerful your computer is. And if you want to learn more about ray tracing, we have a video playlist on that. If you go to our website and look underneath those videos, there are tips about when you ray trace. Here's some suggestions.
Okay. No, that's, I hadn't used the ray trace before I had sent it out when I was doing it, so maybe that's a big difference. I said, trying to work and play with these options at the same time in between clients and be able to get some of this stuff on the internet with everything happening.
Well, Trudy, thanks a lot for your question.
Yep, thank you.
Are you there, Mark?
I'm here. I was just saying thank you for putting this on.
Great. Well, thanks for attending. Did you find it valuable?
It was valuable. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks a lot for attending.
I appreciate it. I look forward to more of these.
Okay. Let's see, John.
I'm here.
How are you today?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
Well, all things considered, I'm doing great.
Well, I messed around with the style palettes a little bit. I don't spend a lot of time with the rendering, mostly drawing the plans, but when I did use it, I got stuck. I applied one of the styles from the library, and I think it changed my entire plan.
Okay.
I couldn't get back to the original plan.
Well, there's always the undo button. So when you use a style palette, let me switch my camera back here. So remember, when you use a style palette, one of the keys to that underneath your style options, when you grab a palette here, when it becomes active, John, down in your lower edit menu are the scoping tools. So you can do it based on object, room, floor, or plan.
Yeah.
So make sure you're in the right scoping method. I typically would use it in room, but there are use cases for others. And then when you click on the room, in theory, that goes in and swaps it out for you.
But you can't hit the undo button and it goes back?
Oh, sure. So, okay, let's assume that I did that and oops, you can just come in here, use your undo operation. So you just go edit undo or Control Z, Command Z on a Mac. And then it will then revert it back to the previous operation, so you can step it back.
Okay. If I had saved the plan, I can't undo it.
So if you save the plan after you did that, undo won't work, but depending on how long you've been working on it, you can pull that plan out of your archive folder.
Okay, yeah.
Are you familiar with your archive folder? So our typical archive, once you save a plan, archives it, I think, our defaults every 5 minutes.
Yeah, I've done that before. Okay. You guys keep changing this program. We've been using it for so long, and every time you change it, it's just like I gotta keep up with it because it keeps changing.
Do you like the style palette?
Yeah, I do. I like it. I don't use it as much as my wife, who does the design part. I do the the floor plans, and I'm the builder. She likes that part more than I do.
Ah, perfect. Well,
Thank
thanks,
you.
John. You bet. Norman, do you have a question?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Much like John, I sort of do the design and the building side. I'm a contractor and use your product to put ideas to clients, and it's awesome for that point of view. So two questions. Previously, you were talking and you showed the sun angle and the time of day for the light coming through.
Yeah.
And I noticed that you sort of had two different times, so you could just switch between the two without actually having to go to the sun angle arrow to change the time of day.
Yeah.
Can you sort of explain how you brought that up? Because obviously the difference between early morning and evening, to be able to just switch between those two times without having to change, is quite good. But I've never been able to do that.
Okay, sure.
And then I've just got one other quick question, and I've spoken with you guys before about the possibility of having a option in the framing that you can set. I think you guys call it blocking, we call it nogs, which is between your vertical studs at 800 centers. I know at the moment you can sort of put your blocking either in line or staggered, and you can put one line of blocking in on the default wall. Is there an easy way? Because our sort of typical sort of standard is to have blocking at 800 centers.
Let's take a look at those questions here real quickly. Let's look at your sun angle question and see if I can answer that one. So in this case, this is the house footprint, and then I have a shadow, if I highlight it, and then I put the text of when that sun angle was generated. And if we come down, so the first step is make sure you put a north pointer in there. I talked also about in the video making sure you set your latitude and longitude. You'll find that in your preferences under CAD. So if you want to make sure you adjust that. Then you draw your north pointer. Contrary to popular belief, north isn't always up. Sounds like, actually, where are you calling from?
New Zealand.
Okay, so we might need to fix that here, right? Here's what I've done. Below the north pointer, I've drawn a couple of sun angles. And the way you draw those sun angles, underneath your CAD menu or the line tool, there's a sun angle. And if you come in here and you just click, it's going to prompt you, and these sun angles can then be specific to the lat and long, but if it will pick up the default. But you can come in here and put in the time of day, date, and then the time. So in this case, here's one at April 2nd, and we'll just go ahead and select OK at 1 p.m. And then there's another shadow. And then when you take a 3D view of this, let's just go and take a 3D overview. You can then choose, and you can save this sun angle into your camera view if you wanted to save the camera. Specifically ask it to use that sun angle when you're doing it. So if we were to come in here, click our edit camera, come over here, make sure we turn on shadows. So we'll leave that shadows on. You can click your adjust light tool, adjust sunlight. You'll have that accessible to you April 2nd, 1 p.m. And then as you rotate around, you can see what the effect is from that shadow.
Okay, awesome. That's where I wasn't sure about putting those sun angles down on the site plan. So
that's a layer you can turn them on or off. What I've done in this particular site plan is I specifically said, I don't know if in Australia they're required, I think, to show a projected sun shadow, but I just used a text call out to show what time of day this shadow was that's highlighted right here. And I just did that with the text object. But when I do my renderings, I do like to have a couple of sun shadows, one in the morning, one in the evening. Might be good to do it seasonally. Did that answer your sun angle question?
yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. It's just I wasn't too sure because previously, I mean, I'm sort of semi-experienced and been using Chief for quite a while, but I just put one sun angle in. I didn't realize by adding additional sun angles, you had that option to be able to change.
Yeah.
What I was doing was going back and sort of resetting the times. So being able to, like, obviously the difference between us at 9:30 in the evening PM in summer is massively different to, you know, it's basically 4 PM in winter. There's like a 5-hour light change.
Yeah, we're in the same boat here.
Yep.
And remember, you can save that with your camera. Now, if I save this camera, if I come in here and click Save Camera and we edit it, and I came in here and I called this rear, and then I could call it, 4:2 shadow. Then I can save that right in that camera. That becomes accessible over in my project browser. When I look at my cameras, if we come over, I got a couple things open, but if I come over in my cameras, overviews, and here's that camera. So you can name your cameras with your shadows. I like to try to do that. And then you just recall it and it's ready to go.
Yeah, no, that's awesome because I'll do a lot of my stuff on my desktop and then just transfer the file onto my laptop. So when I go and see a client, if they've got a bigger monitor or a TV that takes it, then I put it on and sort of present to them, and it gives them an absolute idea of where the sun angles are going to look once we've done the alteration and the addition.
Great. Your second question, you asked about framing. Let's see, let's switch our view here to framing. Let me just switch my 3D view to framing, 3D framing. So when you're talking about blocking, if we pick on this wall right here and you needed to do blocking in here,
Yep.
you want to run 2 sets of blocking, or you want to set the distance between your blocking?
Yeah, so typically, obviously, when I set up the room and the wall framing, I will put in, because I think with Chief you can put blocking through the middle of the wall,
Mm-hmm.
and then use that blocking and just copy and paste it up and down.
Right.
But a feature that would be good for us, typically in New Zealand, and I know I'm probably a very small minority at the moment that's using this particular software, although I am promoting it wherever possible. My wife's just qualified as an interior designer, and I'm getting quite a few of her sort of fellow students interested in using Chief in the trial because of how I found it. But when I'm doing my wall, a great feature for us would be able to actually sort of auto build a wall with all my blocking in at 800 centers.
I see. So when you build the initial wall framing, you would like to see a feature that blocking comes in automatically based on the number, the 800 number that you mentioned.
Yep.
Got it.
Because occasionally too, if that's adjustable, on a rare occasion, if your wall exceeds a certain height, then you've got to do double studs, which is easy enough. Because what I do is, instead of having my studs at, you guys say 2x4, we typically say 4x2.
Mm-hmm.
What I would actually do is make my studs a 4x4.
Uh-huh.
So it sort of represents that you've got sort of a double stud.
Yeah.
But then occasionally they'll actually call for your blocking to be at 600 centers
Mm-hmm.
for a wind, on a particular wall for wind loading. So
right.
if that was adjustable as a preference, so that when I did my walls, automatically my framing was generated, because I find it's quite good. I run a team of guys, and typically if I can do an addition and then run the auto framing, I can then obviously just do an elevation and pull out all the walls with dimensions and give them a framing plan.
Okay, I wrote it down, Norman.
Okay, we'll
Okay.
wait to see it come through.
Have a great day. Thanks for attending.
Oh, thanks so much for your time. It's been absolutely enlightening, and it's good to sort of have that one-on-one.
Good.
Okay, thanks, Tim.
You bet. Sharon Olson.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Scott, thank you for what you're doing. And I have 2 quick questions. What I do with my clients when I was meeting with them was I would export, 3D images for them to look at, mostly dollhouse views, and then I would take my iPad and we would walk through the documents and also look at the 3D images. So I'm kind of back to what the other lady was talking about. When I export the picture, I didn't realize that I needed to change maybe the width and height to get it a little bit better. But I've left the resolution at 72, and then I export it, and I've tried exporting it as both a JPEG and then also a PNG, because I noticed that there's a big difference in the, so for instance, one would be 68 kilobytes with the JPEG, and then 500 with the PNG. Here's the issue: if we want to scroll in, and get a little bit more detail, like you've got that picture up right now, and say if I wanted to show them, say, that bathroom up front,
right,
and wanted to get that a little bit larger and scroll in on that 3D image, it starts pixelating.
Right. So
is there a way to export that in a higher quality to where we can zoom in and out?
Yeah. So here, let me show you. If I pick on that dollhouse here, let's see if I have that handy. Again, depending on how big you want it, I typically will always render mine at 1080 in height. And if you want to zoom in a little bit closer, so if I zoom in, depending on how
Mhm.
close, you start to see it get pixelated, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Now, if you want it to be gigantic, you can do that. You export it, file, export. Again, I usually will type in 1080 in one of the smallest directions, so that gives you that high resolution. There's no
Okay.
reason, I don't know how long this would take. Probably not too terribly long, but if you wanted to go in very large, that will allow you to zoom in quite a ways. The resolution,
Okay. So,
it's not so important. A lot of times, if you're going to print it, maybe have it printed like in a magazine or something.
okay. All right. I had not messed with the resolution. Like I said, I had tinkered with JPEG versus PNG, and that had not helped at all.
I think our graphics people, I don't know if Carrie's still on there, she could probably chime in. I think our graphics people typically say that you're going to get a little better result by pushing out a PNG because you're not going to get as much lossiness in that image compression. Carrie, are you able to chat that out or weigh in on that?
I would recommend if you're having trouble zooming in and it's getting blurry to do the resolution at 300.
Okay, so 300 and a bigger.
Yep, you can only get better by making it bigger, and the resolution, more dots per inch, means more detail.
Yeah, and really, Sharon, that won't take that much longer to do if you put that at 300 or 600 dots per inch, unless you're ray tracing it. At that point, then you start to pay the price for that. But I mean, you're talking about the difference of,
No, I don't ray trace. I just find,
Sure.
yeah, I find the standard view is beautiful, and when you adjust for shadows and everything else, reflections, all the things that you covered, and I had bumped up the resolution, but I wasn't changing the width or the height. So I think that might be the answer to that. And my second quick question is, does Chief have an iCloud now for clients?
We provide a cloud account for you that you can put your renderings for 360 when you export a 3D viewer model. And I didn't talk about 3D viewer models today, but you can export that as a full working model that people can use on an iPad. And so those are available on your cloud account. If I pull that over and we go over to my account, let's just open this up.
Somehow I just missed this feature. I didn't realize I had it. So
yeah, when you go into your account, so you just sign into the website, go to your account. There are two things. There's the 3D viewer models and the 360 panoramas. Those, if I just tap on the 360, here's where you can put these on our cloud account. That allows you to view it. You can also share it, meaning that you could text it, you could email it, or you can embed it on your website. And if
nice. Okay, so I've been using Dropbox.
Okay.
I didn't realize, this was available. So thank you so much. I know there are other people with a lot of questions. And Scott, I appreciate it. I always love hearing you at KBiz. And you really taught me a lot today. So thank you very much.
Well, thanks a lot, Sharon, for attending. Okay, folks, I'm going to kind of wrap it up. Appreciate everybody taking the time to watch. If you found it valuable, maybe let us know. Have a great day, and thanks so much for watching.